I was sitting in a roadside cafe in Jakarta recently, watching the afternoon traffic crawl by. For decades, a view like this was essentially a moving advertisement for Japan Inc. If you looked at the sea of grills and logos, it was an endless parade of Toyota, Daihatsu, and Mitsubishi. These weren't just cars. They were symbols of a 40-year reign. To the Japanese giants, Southeast Asia wasn't just a market, it was their fortress, a reliable cash cow, where they would sell older, fuel-efficient models with massive profit margins, while the rest of the world fretted over the shift to electric. But as I sat there, the rhythm felt different. Quietly weaving through the idling combustion engines was a sleek, compact EV, the BYD Atto 1. Then came another, and then a small, boxy VF3 from Vietnam's VinFast. The familiar wall of Japanese logos was being punctuated by brands that barely existed in this region 5 years ago. When I dug into the 2025 sales data, the unshakable reality looked even more fragile. In Indonesia, the very heart of Japan's dominance, their market share didn't just dip, plummeted by over 8 percentage points in a single year. In Thailand, the drop was even steeper, falling 9 points to 68%. Perhaps most shocking was Vietnam, where the local upstart VinFast officially dethroned Toyota to take the #1 spot. What was once a total monopoly is turning into a retreat. One executive from a major Japanese firm, normally known for corporate stoicism, recently admitted to a strong sense of crisis, watching Chinese competitors use a trial-and-error strategy to dismantle decades of Japanese brand loyalty in months. The fortress is being breached, and the cash cow is being led away. It makes you wonder, if the most loyal market in the world can flip this fast, is there any stronghold left for the traditional internal combustion engine?
Wow. I mean, it's a staggering visual, isn't it? That image of the cash cow being led away is, well, it's visceral. But honestly, it might be a little too gentle for what's actually happening.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. We aren't just talking about, a bad sales quarter for Toyota or Nissan here. We're talking about the rapid dismantling of an industrial empire, one that literally took half a century to build.
Right, and empire is a big word, but when I started pulling the data together for this deep dive, I realized we can't really call it anything else, because we're talking about a whole region, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It was effectively a Japanese colony in automotive terms. But before we get into the actual collapse, I wanted to define this idea of the fortress. Why was Southeast Asia so completely locked down by Japan in the first place?
Well, you have to go back to the 1970s and 80s for that. While American car companies were mostly focused on their own domestic market,
Just selling trucks and big sedans to Americans.
the Japanese companies like Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, they saw the potential in Southeast Asia. So they started investing heavily in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. But they didn't just ship completed cars over there on boats.
They built the infrastructure.
They exported their entire way of doing business. They built the factories locally. They trained the local engineers. And this is the crucial part. They built the supply chain.
The Keiretsu system.
Yes, the Keiretsu. This is the piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of people in the West miss. Because in the US or Europe, a car company might just buy parts from whoever the lowest bidder is.
Right, you shop around for the cheapest steering wheel.
Right. But in the Japanese model, the car maker actually owns a stake in the supplier. And then that supplier owns a stake in their sub-supplier. And they all have cross-share holdings with the mega bank that funds the whole operation.
It was a pyramid.
It's a massive pyramid of loyalty and financial interdependence.
Meaning it's not just a casual business relationship, it's a structural marriage.
A structural marriage is a great way to put it. And that structure creates an incredibly formidable barrier to entry for anyone else. That's the fortress. If you wanted to sell cars in Thailand back in, say, 2010, you couldn't just open a dealership and hope for the best.
Like you're fighting an army.
You're competing against a vertically integrated machine. Every bolt, every piston, every transmission was sourced from a network specifically designed to exclude outsiders. And that gave Japan a massive advantage. They could treat ASEAN as this high-margin sanctuary.
Meaning they didn't have to innovate as much.
Exactly. They could sell technology that was 10, maybe 15 years old, just basic internal combustion engines at premium prices. Because there was literally zero competition.
And that's where the cash cow element comes in. They were using the massive profits from Jakarta and Bangkok to subsidize their R&D and their price wars over in America and Europe.
And that right there is why this current collapse is so incredibly dangerous for Japan's macro economy. It's not just about losing some car sales in Thailand. It's about losing the core funding mechanism for the entire corporate structure. If the Southeast Asian fortress falls, the capital they need to pivot to EVs disappears with it.
I want to look at the human cost of this. Because macroeconomics can feel really dry and abstract until you see what it actually looks like on the ground.
It's devastating on the ground.
Right. I was reading this account about an elderly man named Hiroshi in Aichi Prefecture. And Aichi is essentially the heartland of Toyota in Japan. Hiroshi spent 40 years, his entire adult life forging piston rings. He's a master of metallurgy specifically for combustion engines.
And he's probably incredibly proud of that craft, the Monozukuri philosophy.
Deeply proud. But now he's sitting in a cafe in his hometown watching the news report, a 22% collapse in Southeast Asian sales.
Wow, 22%.
Yeah. And for him, that's not just the stock ticker moving. That is the sound of a drying well. He's watching the younger workers in his town pack up their lives and leave. Because the local suppliers, those sub-tier companies in the Keiretsu you mentioned, they're suddenly losing all their export orders.
And this exposes the trap of the Keiretsu system. It's brilliant for efficiency and quality control, but it's terrible for agility. Hiroshi's factory is optimized to make piston rings with micron-level precision. You cannot simply flip a switch on a Tuesday and turn that exact same factory into a battery anode plant.
The machines are different.
The machines are totally different. The required chemistry is different. The work of skills are different.
So when we casually say, oh, Japan just needs to pivot to EVs, we're kind of glossing over the fact that millions of workers like Hiroshi are structurally obsolete in an electric world.
That is the harsh, unavoidable reality of this transition. Think about the engineering. An internal combustion engine has roughly 2,000 moving parts.
2,000.
An electric motor has about 20.
Dang.
It is a 99% reduction in mechanical complexity. And economically, that means a 99% reduction in the need for specialized suppliers like Hiroshi. When the ASEAN market suddenly stops buying gas-powered cars, those missing orders don't get magically replaced by EV part orders for those specific factories in Aichi. They just vanish.
And the data supports this terrifyingly well. When you look at Japan's economy, the auto industry is 2.9% of their entire GDP.
Which is huge for a single sector.
But it gets crazier. It's 17.4% of all manufacturing shipments. That is nearly 1/5 of everything Japan physically makes.
And it employs 8.3% of the total workforce. We are talking about millions of families whose livelihoods are directly tied to the combustion engine. So when we see the data that Japanese sales in the ASEAN 6 countries plunged by 12% in just 2024 alone.
Their market share dropped from 68.2 to 63.9%.
Right. When you see drops like that, you are watching the real-time erosion of Japan's middle class.
A 12% drop in a single year. I mean, in the corporate world, a 2% drop is usually enough to cause a panic.
A 12% drop is a free fall. In the automotive industry, market share usually moves in tiny decimals. You spend billions of dollars to fight for a 0.5% gain over 5 years.
Right.
So to lose 8 or 9 percentage points in key markets like Indonesia and Thailand in a single calendar year is catastrophic. It suggests a total, almost violent rejection of the product lineup by the consumer.
And this creates that downward spiral we touched on earlier. If Japan loses the profits from ASEAN, they literally have less money to invest in the research and development required to catch up with China.
Developing a brand new ground-up EV platform costs billions of dollars. Building just one battery plant costs billions more. For decades, the massive profit margins from selling those older gas cars in Southeast Asia essentially paid for Japan's R&D.
So if you kill the cash cow,
you starve the future. Japan is facing an existential dread right now. They are losing the capital. They desperately need to fund their transition right at the exact moment that the transition is becoming a global mandate.
it feels like the ultimate innovator's dilemma, but playing out on a massive national scale. They were so dominant, so good at perfecting the old technology that they financially and culturally cannot grab the new technology.
And their competitors are fully aware of this. And they aren't waiting around for Japan to figure it out.
Well, that brings us perfectly to the actual battlefield on the ground. We've looked at the factory floor in Japan, but let's look at the showroom floor in Bangkok. Here, Somchai. He's a multi-generational dealership owner in Thailand.
Oh, dealership families in Thailand are a big deal.
Yeah, they're like local royalty. His family has been the absolute face of Toyota in his district for 30 years.
Community. If you bought a car, you bought it from them.
But right now, Somchai is watching his pristine showroom turn into a ghost town. He describes standing in his empty lot, looking across the street at a brand new, Neon-lit Chinese EV flagship store.
A sack.
Packed. It's got a coffee bar, massive interactive screens, and young Thai families are just lining up to test drive cars that are 30% cheaper than the hybrid Somchai is trying to push.
And those Chinese cars are undoubtedly packed with digital technology that his Japanese models simply do not have.
Right. And here's the pivot that really struck me. Somchai is currently in secret negotiations to drop his family's Japanese franchise entirely, just so he could pick up a Chinese one.
Wow. After 30 years.
30 years of loyalty. But he said something so pragmatic. He said, loyalty doesn't pay the electricity bill when all the neighbors have already gone electric.
That right there is the pivotal moment in this whole saga. When the distribution network, the actual local families who sell the cars and hold the community trust, when they start to defect, the game is truly over.
Because the Japanese advantage was always built on trust, right?
Absolutely. It was about reliable service, easy to find parts, and great resale value. But Somchai is realizing that holding on to a legacy Japanese franchise is turning into a literal legacy tax. He's paying a premium in lost sales to be associated with a brand that consumers feel is falling behind.
Because Toyota is still the biggest car company in the world by volume, Nissan and Honda are massive. They have enormous cash reserves. Why can't they just eat the R&D cost, flood the market with cheap, high-quality EVs tomorrow, and crush these Chinese upstarts? Why is a guy like Somchai panic selling his legacy?
Because they simply don't have the product ready. It's not just a matter of throwing cash at a factory. It's about fundamental development cycles. Remember that Japanese executive you quoted at the start of the deep dive?
The one I mentioned, the trial and error strategy.
Yes, that is the core difference. The traditional Japanese engineering philosophy is Monozukuri, the art of making things. It's entirely focused on perfection. You plan meticulously, you test exhaustively, you refine it over and over. You measure 10 times before you make a single cut.
Which is exactly why a 1995 Corolla will still start up perfectly today.
Exactly, it builds incredibly durable hardware. But that exact same philosophy is fatal when you're competing in software. The Chinese EV makers, companies like BYD, Neta, Great Wall Motor, they operate much more like Silicon Valley tech firms.
Move fast and break things.
Their strategy is launch and learn. They get a good enough car out into the market quickly, they gather massive amounts of real-world user data, and then they push over-the-air software updates to fix the bugs. They are literally releasing entirely new models or major facelifts every 12 to 18 months.
And what's a typical Japanese development cycle?
4 to 5 years.
Wow. So by the time Toyota perfects a single EV model and gets it to the showroom, BYD has already released 3 subsequent generations of the Atto 3.
And the consumers in Southeast Asia are changing, they are very young, and they are incredibly digital native. They don't care about a 50-year legacy of piston reliability. They want a car that integrates flawlessly with their smartphone, has a massive touchscreen interface, and gets continuous software updates like an iPad.
That tracks perfectly with the consumer data. The Deloitte report we looked at had a fascinating stat. They found that only 32% of ASEAN drivers consider brand familiarity a top factor when buying a car.
32% is shockingly low for a market that Japan used to own based purely on brand trust.
The data shows they care about 3 things now: price, quality, and tech performance.
So the Toyota Premium, this ingrained idea that consumers will willingly pay more just for the peace of mind of the Toyota badge, that's evaporating.
Completely evaporating. Especially when the Chinese cars sitting across the street are 30% cheaper and feel like spaceships inside. And it's not just the car itself. You mentioned Somchai looking at that neon-lit dealership. He's seeing companies like GAC Group coming into Indonesia and Thailand. And they aren't just selling cars. They are building an entire ecosystem.
The ecosystem approach is brilliant.
They're opening high-end experience centers in malls. They're building their own dedicated charging networks. They're deploying smart factories.
And see, Japan used to own the ecosystem. But their ecosystem was physical gas stations and thousands of local mechanics who knew exactly how to fix a Hilux carburetor.
Right.
Now, the required ecosystem is seamless charging apps, battery swapping stations, and digital integration. The Chinese companies are arriving and bringing that entire digital infrastructure with them on day one. Japan is essentially still trying to sell a standalone hardware product in a world that demands a networked digital device.
It really highlights the inertia you were talking about. Let's shift gears and look at the policy side of this disruption. Because this is not just a free market brawl between companies. Local governments are aggressively putting their thumbs on the scale.
Absolutely, the industrial policy shifts are massive.
And this brings us to Vietnam. which, honestly, when I was reading the sources, seems like the most aggressive and fascinating player in the region right now.
Vietnam is a standout because they aren't just trying to switch what their citizens consume. They're fundamentally trying to capture the production side of the shift.
I was looking at this profile of a young engineer named Lin working in Haiphong. She works at a massive factory for VinFast, the local Vietnamese automaker. She grew up in a world where the very word car was entirely synonymous with Japanese import.
That was the reality for her whole generation.
But now she's managing a high-tech robotic arm in a facility that is exporting Vietnamese-branded EVs to the rest of the world. She actually described watching the decline of Japanese market share as a feeling of liberation.
Liberation. That's such a powerful word choice. It frames the previous 40 years of Japanese economic dominance not as a mutually beneficial partnership, but almost as a technological occupation that her country is finally breaking free from.
She sees the government's local content rules and EV subsidies as Vietnam finally demanding a seat at the table. But, and let's be real about VinFast for a second, Lean is incredibly proud of that Made in Vietnam badge. But isn't there a massive Trojan horse element happening here?
Oh, there absolutely is a Trojan horse dynamic, and the reports highlight this beautifully. VinFast dethroning Toyota to become the #1 selling brand in Vietnam is historic. But if you put a VinFast up on a lift and open it up, what do you actually find inside?
Chinese parts.
You find high-voltage battery packs from Goshen High-Tech. You find chassis integration and software architecture developed by Chinese engineering firms.
So it's fundamentally Chinese technology, just wrapped in a Vietnamese flag.
Yes. And this reveals the deeper genius of the Chinese regional strategy. Beijing and these Chinese firms are fully aware of the geopolitical tensions. They know that a literal Made in China badge can sometimes trigger nationalistic pushback or tariffs.
Right, and nobody wants to feel like they're just trading a Japanese monopoly for a Chinese one.
Exactly. So the Chinese tech giants are more than happy to act as the Tier 1 suppliers. They provide the highly advanced, high-margin guts of the EV revolution to these local national champions like VinFast or like Proton in Malaysia.
It's a win-win for them. It allows the local politicians to stand on a stage and claim victory. Look at us, we're building our own cars, while China quietly secures absolute dominance over the actual supply chain and battery chemistry.
It's masterful, and you see this reflected in the incentives war across the region. Every country is scrambling to attract this supply chain. Look at Thailand's EV 3.5 policy.
The Thai government is throwing serious money around.
They are offering direct consumer subsidies of up to 100,000 baht per car. That's almost $3,000, which goes a long way there. Plus, they are slashing import duties. But there is a massive catch.
You have to build the cars locally to keep getting the money.
Exactly. It's conditioned on local manufacturing. If you import one EV today, you have to produce one locally by 2026.
So they are actively forcing the supply chain to migrate.
Yes. And who is actually packing up and moving to Thailand? It's the Chinese. BYD, Great Wall Motor, SAIC, they're all rapidly setting up massive production plants in Rayong province. Meanwhile, what are the Japanese doing? They are still spending their time lobbying the Thai government to extend tax breaks for traditional hybrids.
They're fighting the last war.
They are fighting the last war, and they are losing the factory of the future because of it.
And then you have Indonesia. The policy there is wild. Jakarta has historically had some of the worst gridlock traffic on planet Earth. So a few years ago, the government introduced the odd-even license plate rule to thin out the cars. If your license plate ends in an odd number, you can only drive into the city center on odd-numbered days.
Which is a nightmare if you need to commute every day.
Right, unless, and here's the policy loophole, unless you drive a fully electric vehicle. EVs are completely exempt from the odd-even restriction.
Which turns an EV into a golden ticket.
Exactly. If I'm a commuter stuck in Jakarta traffic, I suddenly do not care about a 40-year legacy of Toyota reliability. I care about getting to my office on a Tuesday.
And because the Japanese automakers had spent years dragging their feet, they didn't have a cheap, accessible EV ready for that market. So the only vehicle that could solve this massive daily headache for the average Indonesian was the Wuling Air EV.
The little micro...
Yes, it's this tiny, boxy, very affordable Chinese EV. It became an absolute smash hit bestseller practically overnight. Not because it was a luxury status symbol, but because it was literally the only affordable key that unlocked the city for daily commuters.
That is a perfect encapsulation of how bold government policy and aggressive product availability intersect. Japan spent years presenting data to these governments, lobbying for what they called realistic timelines for electrification, arguing the grid wasn't ready.
And while Japan was giving PowerPoint presentations, China just shipped boats full of cars that fit perfectly into the immediate policy loopholes.
It really is a story of speed versus inertia. Let's drill down a bit more into the specific countries because, as you know, Southeast Asia is definitely not a monolith. The battlefield dynamics look totally different in Thailand than they do in Indonesia or Malaysia. Let's start with Thailand, which has always proudly called itself the Detroit of Asia.
Thailand is the undisputed heavyweight of regional manufacturing, but there is a massive quirk to their domestic market. It is absolute pickup truck country.
Right. I was looking at the breakdown. Something like 40% of all vehicles sold in Thailand are pickup trucks, models like the Toyota Hilux or the Isuzu D-Max.
Those trucks are legendary. They are the absolute workhorses of the Thai agricultural and commercial economy. And this specific segment is Japan's very last true stronghold in the country.
Because there aren't really any electric pickups yet.
Exactly. Currently, the Chinese EV makers are absolutely dominating the passenger car market, the sedans, the crossover SUVs, because that's what they already manufacture at scale back in China for their urban middle class. But they haven't completely cracked the electric pickup code yet, at least not at a price point that makes economic sense for a provincial Thai farmer.
So the Japanese are maintaining their 40% market share in trucks simply because nobody has offered a viable alternative yet.
Now, but objectively, that is a terrifying strategic position for Toyota and Isuzu to be in. You are essentially one successful product launch away from total obsolescence.
Right, because we know it's coming.
We absolutely know it's coming. BYD is actively testing an electric pickup. Geely has their Radar brand looking at the region, and the moment a Chinese manufacturer releases a rugged electric truck that has a decent range and crucially features vehicle-to-load technology.
Wait, explain vehicle-to-load for a second, because that seems important.
It's game-changing. Vehicle-to-load, or V2L, means the truck's massive battery can act as a mobile generator, so you can plug standard appliances directly into the truck.
So if I'm a Thai farmer and my truck can suddenly power my electric saws or run the floodlights in my field at night or power my house during an outage.
Exactly. The Hilux cannot do that. An electric truck changes the entire value proposition of the vehicle from just being transportation to being a mobile off-grid power station. When the Chinese deliver that at a competitive price, Japan's last stronghold collapses overnight.
Man, that is bleak for Japan. Let's move south to Indonesia. We touched on the traffic rules in Jakarta, but we really have to talk about the nickel, the Hilirisasi policy.
Hilirisasi, downstreaming. This is arguably the biggest, most aggressive macroeconomic gamble happening in the entire region right now.
So President Jokowi basically looked at Indonesia's nickel reserves, which are the largest in the world. And nickel is obviously critical for EV batteries. And he just drew a line in the sand. He said, we are done letting foreign countries dig up our raw dirt and export it. If you want access to our nickel, you have to build the processing plants and the battery factories right here in Indonesia.
And the European Union absolutely hated that. They sued Indonesia at the World Trade Organization over the export ban.
They did. While Western countries were busy filing lawsuits in Geneva, Chinese companies were busy pouring concrete.
Yes. Giants like Tsingshan Holding Group and CATL, they just accepted the new terms. They poured tens of billions of dollars into remote areas like Sulawesi to build massive smelters and these highly complex, high-pressure acid leaching plants.
So by playing hardball, Indonesia isn't just trying to sell a few more cars. They're positioning themselves to be the Saudi Arabia of the electric age.
In theory, yes. But in practice, you have to look at who actually owns the infrastructure. The new downstream processing industry in Indonesia is overwhelmingly dominated and financed by Chinese firms. So Indonesia hasn't just built an independent industry. They have effectively become a critical integrated node in the Chinese battery supply chain. And this gives the Chinese car makers an absolutely massive structural cost advantage when they sell cars in Indonesia.
Because they are sourcing the heaviest, most expensive part of the car, the battery materials, right there in the local market.
Exactly. They avoid the shipping costs, they avoid the import tariffs, and they control the raw material pricing. It makes it nearly impossible for legacy automakers to compete on the sticker price.
Which perfectly explains why Hyundai is suddenly struggling there. Because Hyundai was actually the first mover in Indonesia, right? They built a factory, they launched the Ioniq 5, they were doing great.
Hyundai did everything right by the traditional playbook. But the Chinese brands like BYD and Chery are coming in now with a level of vertical integration that goes all the way down to the literal nickel mine. Hyundai just buys batteries. The Chinese consortiums mine the ore, refine the chemicals, build the cell, and assemble the car.
It's a completely different weight class.
And it allows companies like Wuling to introduce that Air EV we talked about. Japan has zero answer to that. They have those tiny Kai cars domestically in Japan, which would be perfect, but they stubbornly kept them as a domestic treasure and never electrified them for export until the window had closed.
Let's pivot to Malaysia real quick, because the dynamic there is listed as a premium split. How does Malaysia differ from Thailand and Indonesia?
Malaysia is very unique because they have heavily protected national car brands, Perodua and Proton. If you are a middle-class Malaysian buying a basic, affordable daily driver, you are almost certainly buying a Perodua. The government ensures it's the most economical choice.
So the Chinese EV makers can't just flood the bottom of the market with cheap cars like they did in Indonesia.
Exactly. The Malaysian government acts as a shield for the low end. So the EV battleground in Malaysia has actually been pushed up into the premium and mid-range sectors. This is where BYD is going head-to-head with Tesla and BMW for the affluent urban buyers in Kuala Lumpur.
But wait, didn't you mention earlier that the Trojan horse strategy comes back into play with Proton?
And it's brilliant. Proton, the national pride in Malaysia, is now partially owned by Geely.
Geely, the massive Chinese conglomerate that also owns Volvo.
The very same. So Proton's newest premium models, like the Proton X90, are essentially re-engineered Geely vehicles.
So Geely gets to bypass the protectionist tariffs.
The advanced Chinese technology is entering the mass market not as a threatening foreign invader, but packaged safely as the natural evolution of the beloved national car. It completely bypasses the local nationalism that might otherwise block a direct Chinese import wave.
It really seems like every country we look at offers a different flavor of the exact same underlying story. It's Chinese fluidity and adaptability going up against Japanese rigidity.
That is the defining thread. Whether they are exploiting policy loopholes in Jakarta, building deep supply chain integration in Vietnam, or using corporate partnerships in Malaysia, the Chinese firms act like water. They just fill whatever shape the local container demands.
The Japanese firms are like bricks. They're incredibly strong, but they don't flow.
Exactly.
Let's look at the road ahead, though. Because despite all this incredible growth and disruption, the complete takeover by EVs isn't exactly guaranteed to be frictionless. I was looking at that Deloitte consumer report again, and it highlights infrastructure anxiety as a massive barrier. Something like 44 or 45% of people surveyed said charging time and lack of chargers were their top concerns.
And this right here is the core of the Japanese counterargument. If you listen to Toyota's chairman, Akio Toyoda, he has been extremely vocal about this exact friction point. He argues that the electrical grids in Southeast Asia simply aren't ready for a full EV transition.
And to be fair, he has a point, right?
He has a very valid point. If you live out in a rural province in Thailand or on a remote island in Indonesia, and you are 200 kilometers away from the nearest reliable fast charger, a pure EV isn't a luxury. It's a massive burden.
So Toyota's arguing that traditional hybrids are the only practical, realistic bridge for the next decade.
Right. Japan is essentially betting that the harsh reality of developing world infrastructure will naturally slow down the EV transition, giving them time to catch up. They are betting on friction. They are hoping that the lack of public chargers will frustrate early adopters and send the mass market running back to the safety of a Japanese hybrid.
But based on everything we've discussed today, I'm guessing the Chinese answer to a lack of infrastructure isn't just to wait around.
Their answer is, fine, we'll build it ourselves.
Like the GSE ecosystem we mentioned.
Exactly. When Jession enters a new market, they immediately announce simultaneous investments in their own branded charging networks. BYD is actively partnering with local state-run power companies to upgrade grid connections. They don't view infrastructure as a barrier. They view it as just another part of the product they are selling.
It's the Tesla supercharger playbook, but rolled out across the entire ASEAN region.
Yes, and if they actually pull that off, if Chinese capital builds out the charging infrastructure before Japan finally releases a truly competitive, affordable EV, then Japan's practicality argument dies completely.
And there is this massive, almost painful geopolitical irony hanging over this entire situation. The German Marshall Fund report we reviewed points this out so clearly. Think about who actually pushed Southeast Asia to care about green energy in the first place.
We did. The global north, the United States, Europe, and Japan.
Right. For the last decade, Western diplomats have been flying into ASEAN summits, putting pressure on these developing economies, telling them, you must decarbonize, you must set zero-emission targets.
We artificially created the policy demand. We successfully convinced ASEAN governments to adopt all these EV subsidies and aggressive environmental targets to meet global climate goals.
But then, when those governments finally turned around and said, okay, we passed the laws, we're ready to buy the green tech, who's selling?
The only country capable of supplying affordable green technology at massive scale was China.
So we literally created the market for our biggest geopolitical rival. The US and Japan laid out the banquet table, and China just walked in and sat down to eat.
It is a devastating strategic own goal, and you have to ask, where is the United States in all of this regional manufacturing?
Well, there are all those rumors about Tesla building a massive gigafactory in Thailand, right? The Thai prime minister was taking meetings with Elon Musk.
Rumors that have now been completely shelved. Tesla pulled back on their regional manufacturing plans. The U.S. government is currently highly focused on things like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which produces a lot of high-level diplomatic talk about securing supply chains, but it doesn't actually put steel in the ground or affordable cars on the road in Jakarta.
So there's a total vacuum.
And power abhors a vacuum. If American and Japanese capital aren't physically there to build the factories and sell the consumer products, Chinese capital will.
Oh, yeah?
And we need to realize that this isn't just about bending sheet metal anymore.
Because modern cars are computers.
Exactly. Modern EVs are incredibly sophisticated data-gathering devices. They map local roads with high-definition cameras, they track civilian driving habits, they connect directly to the local 5G telecom grids.
Wow. So we are looking at a very near future where the streets of major allied capitals like Bangkok and Jakarta are constantly being mapped by Chinese software, powered by Chinese battery chemistry, and all that telematics data is flowing back to servers that definitely aren't located in Tokyo or Detroit.
That is the exact trajectory we are on right now. And once that foundational digital and physical infrastructure is locked in, it is incredibly hard to displace. You don't just casually switch national software ecosystems overnight.
I mean, we started this whole conversation sitting with Hiroshi in a cafe in Japan, mourning the slow death of his piston ring factory. And we've somehow ended up talking about the entire geopolitical map of the 21st century being redrawn by battery chemistry and over-the-air software updates.
But that's how it all connects. The macro is the micro. Hiroshi losing his job in Aichi is just the butterfly effect of a strategic failure that happened 10 years ago in the boardrooms of Tokyo. They thought the walls of their Southeast Asian fortress were high enough to protect them forever.
They didn't realize the enemy had learned how to fly.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a truly staggering amount of ground today. To see the complete collapse of a 40-year monopoly happen in just 5 years is something that economic historians are going to be studying for decades. The speed of the drop going from an 88% absolute stranglehold in the market down into the low 60s and still falling fast, it's just unprecedented.
It is the defining industrial story of our time in Asia.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought today. We often talk about the cost of the green transition in dollars or degrees Celsius. But looking at the empty Japanese showrooms in Bangkok and the bustling EV factories in Vietnam, we're seeing a different cost. The transition to electric isn't just changing what we drive, it's aggressively redistributing the industrial wealth of the 21st century. Japan spent 40 years building a fortress in Southeast Asia, but they forgot one crucial thing. Walls that keep competitors out also keep you locked inside with the past.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, until next time, keep watching the road.